Thank you so much, Jonathan, and thanks so much for having me back. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to share this information with you all. There's nothing sadder than research that just sits on a shelf and doesn't get used. So, as Jonathan said, my name is Leanne Sarson, and I am with MQO Research. MQO Research is one of 5 companies in Group M5. We also have Public Affairs, Wavelight, which is our in-house production, Group ATN, which is a specialized consulting firm that does feasibility studies, impact studies, those types of things, and our flagship company, which is M5 Marketing Communications, which is one of the largest fully integrated communications and marketing companies in Atlantic Canada, with 120 employees across the region and satellite offices actually that stretch across Canada. So without ado, I'm going to get into things. And again, as Jonathan said, the intention here is to share some of the insights on the mindsets of Atlantic Canadians, on travel suggested areas and opportunities for planning as we move into the end of the pandemic and the summer travel season into the fall. So I am going to go through a little more of the data than I did last time. And the intention of that, or the purpose of that, is we did make some shifts in the survey this time around based on some of the things that came out of the last round and some questions that folks had. We wanted to tap into some more specifics around packages that people might be interested in. So I'm going to go through some of those and then get very quickly to the takeaways so that we can hopefully have a nice long question and answer period where people will hopefully be able to ask specifics about their business. So as we all know, the COVID pandemic has had a substantial impact on Atlantic Canadian, the economies and the tourism sector in particular. So the question that we went into this third phase was, what do we need to know and understand about consumers to help navigate this coming tourism season with all of the differences this time around, this summer, with vaccinations, with changing and the potential to open up to the rest of Canada. So all of those things, how are they impacting spending patterns, priorities for travelers, and even how travelers are viewing the world now as we come into that post-pandemic state. So just to give you a little information, we spoke to 2,127 Atlantic Canadian residents. We did focus on Atlantic Canada this time with the understanding that as we moved into the summer season, the majority of the travel is going to still be local, regional travel. The data that was collected between April 26th and May 16th, that's really important to highlight, just because with all of the things that have fluctuated in the past few months, and really since 2021, it's really important to interpret the data, understanding where we all were at the time the data was collected. So as this data was collected, we were at about 3 to 4% vaccination rate. So people could see the schedule of when we were going to be mostly vaccinated, but that's where we were in terms of vaccination rates. New Brunswick had a small outbreak they were just coming out of in terms of lockdowns, which was I think in the Hamilton region, and Halifax numbers were just ticking up. So we were headed into our lockdown as things started. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, because again, throughout this entire pandemic, sentiment has changed very rapidly, and perspectives change rapidly depending on where we are. Announcement of vaccines, percentage population vaccinated, what's going on in terms of restrictions. So it's important to have that context. So one of the first things we looked at was what people's current travel plans were in there. And I'm going to kind of speed through this with just the high points, because as things open up and as reopening plans are announced, the current travel plans for folks will change. But one thing that's important to note about the information here in terms of what we were taking away from people's plans is that 71% said that self-isolation protocols for out-of-region travel have had a significant impact on decisions to not make travel plans. So that's really important to take away to understand, again, what we're going to be looking at for as we go into July and August in particular as things open up. So you can see here at the time that we collected this data, what the breakdown looked like for folks who were going to travel in their own provinces, with the majority in Newfoundland being 76 having staycations, and then around half of current travel plans in the Maritime provinces sticking around the Maritime provinces. And that's just what this illustrates is what how travel plans were concentrated outside of the Atlantic region. And you can see again, people aren't going very far from home. So over on the right there, you can see the current travel plans by month. But what this really says is we're headed into another season where the majority of travel is going to be located again regionally. The other takeaway from this data is that in line with what's typical of regional travel and staycations is that Atlantic Canadians are still planning to take a smaller number of shorter trips for another season. We also found that 25% of travelers aren't going to be staying in paid accommodations for their trip. Those are folks that will be going to visit family and friends and then exploring from that as a home base. Taking a look at how isolation it would impact what people are going to do with their travel plans. Again, there's about 31% that said it wouldn't impact them. About a quarter looking at postponing it to later in the fall. So again, they're going to push it out so that they don't have to deal with the self-isolation. 22% said they would cancel travel plans altogether, and 10% said they would change destinations, with 28% saying that their province, they would stay within their home province if that were the case. 64% of those that we surveyed would normally travel outside of Atlantic Canada between May and October. And now getting into the travel sentiment stuff. So that was stuff I wanted to kind of speed through just to give you a little bit of a backdrop on travelers, but this is where people's level of comfort is right now with the pandemic. So knowing now where we are with vaccinations, we still see a fair amount of hesitation to venture into places where either most residents are not vaccinated, at least having one dose of vaccination, or where the destination has achieved herd immunity. So a good amount of people, you can see there up in that first one, communities within the home province, we've got 58% are very comfortable with traveling around home. You can see the 13 and 36% are in the trumpet. Once I can travel without self-isolating, and once the destination has gone 2 weeks with no cases, are fine within Atlantic Canada. And then as you go down to other Canadian provinces, the US and international, what those orange and yellow bars mean is essentially that's where there's a fairly high level of discomfort unless that destination has gotten to a place where the vaccine rate is high enough that they feel comfortable that they're close to herd immunity and they can feel safe. So again, this is another graph that points to the fact that the majority of Atlantic Canadians will be traveling within Atlantic Canada again this year. So there's still, we looked at decision making around travel, and there's still a large percentage of the population in the 80% that are most concerned with health. So you can see that the number of active COVID cases in a destination is still top of mind. Health and safety standards are still very important to people, as well as flexibility. So the two takeaways here are flexibility for cancellation standards, and giving people the option to be able to make last minute changes is still very important. Even though we're going into a summer where the vaccination rate should make it very, very unlikely that there are going to be additional waves or lockdowns, people are still very wary after going through a 14-month period where things can change on a dime. Most of the Atlantic provinces have had at least 3 waves, and so people are getting used to getting things changing, and that's something that people are still looking for, is that flexibility and the communication that they'll be able to cancel on a dime, as well as comfort that tourism operators are still taking COVID precautions. So even though we're at a place where the majority of the population is going to be vaccinated going into the summer, people haven't let go of the mindset that they want to be safe. So there's not the level of comfort with the vaccines isn't quite there yet, in that people are still wanting confirmation that COVID protocols for the most part are being followed. At the very least, health and safety standards that are mandated or recommended by public health are being upheld by businesses. So one of the things we looked into this time that was a little bit different than last time is a little more specific around travel preferences and how we build packages and where people are going to vacation. So we looked at what a travel package looks like for people that are doing staycations. We know people tend to take fewer days on their trip when they're vacationing close to home, and they do tend to spend a little less. So what does that mean for putting together a package, and is that something people are interested in? There's about a 50% interest, so about half of the travelers were interested in looking at travel packages, even for those vacationing in their home province, even if you're visiting friends and family. So those would be travel packages that could be put together that don't necessarily include accommodations, and those for visiting other Atlantic Canadian provinces. And what it is that people like about these packages is knowing trip costs up front, being able to know what's open and available, and discounted rates for activities and experiences. So the bundle that offers a discount if you're going to do multiple activities that are part of that package. So we took some vague descriptions of types of vacations to get a sense of what the most popular packages were. And these are packages that do include accommodations, with the exception of the getaway within a getaway. So I'm just going to give you a brief description. The family cottage getaway was essentially a description of an opportunity to get away at a cottage where you could bring a family or a group of friends or just couples. You could bring your own food in, so you wouldn't necessarily have to dine out. And there were suggested itineraries, but not necessarily paid for activities as part of the package. A regional wine brewery and tour included accommodations, as well as multiple stops on a tour for wine and brewery, as well as some restaurants vouchers is included in that package. Outdoor escapades was described as two different options. So it would be accommodations as a home base, and then you could have more active adventures, bike tours, things like that, or you could have more quiet walking guided tours, and that would again be all focused outside and active. The family reunion package was an opportunity to be able to book multiple rooms or accommodations, and again had activities that were available for all age groups. And the getaway within a getaway was a smaller, short package that did not necessarily include accommodations, and had a home base where you were staying, visiting friends and family, but they could then have a couple of days away or do activities as you're there. So what we found is the top three picks by far and away were the family cottage getaway, the outdoor escapades, and the getaway within a getaway. And this lines up very well with sentiment and what we were hearing with folks' concern about health still being very high, even though, as I said, we're going into a summer where vaccination rates are top-notch or better than maybe what could have even expected. People still want a very tight control over what they're going to be exposed to. And so things like a cottage, staying outdoors, and being able to stay with friends and family where they're familiar with the environment gives a level of control and a feeling of, again, that health and safety in their vacation. So you're not necessarily, these aren't vacation packages that necessarily include exposure to large groups. So we took a look at what these packages will be targeted at in terms of travel composition. So the type of folks that would be picking these packages. The family cottage getaway was, again, it makes sense, targeted at folks' families with children under 17. So that was most popular among those groups. The family reunion was primarily focused at families traveling with adult children. So if you're communicating that as a package and that's the messaging, that's your target there. Outdoor escapades tended to be solo travelers, couples, or couples traveling with friends. So that was more popular among those folks. The regional wine brewery tour was most popular among couples and couples traveling with friends. And the getaway within a getaway was most popular with young families and couples traveling with friends. So one of the trends that we're seeing, not just in Atlantic Canada, but outside of Atlantic Canada as well, is that while people aren't necessarily ready to go back to crowded spaces and to large events, there is a desire to travel with multi-generationally, and there is a desire to travel with family that you haven't seen, with friends that you haven't had the opportunity to see in small groups. This is just a quick comparison of each of those. And one thing I wanted to highlight, so we took a look at whether or not each of these packages would be more appealing in your home province or away, as well as the length of trip that people will be likely to spend for these. And it's a fairly even split. So we also took a look at spend. So if you were to take a vacation like this, what would you be expecting to spend on this trip? So we had, I had the kind of the low range and the high range there for what people said, and you'll have access to these slides to take a look, but I did want to highlight when we asked people a ballpark for what they would spend for each of these trips, we found that the numbers that people were giving us seemed quite low. Later on in the survey, we asked people to break down what their typical spending might be on a trip for dining, accommodation, and activities. And we found people were much better at estimating costs when they broke their trip or their vacation down into those three pieces. And so just to illustrate there, what is more representative of more of a higher end spend for a 4-night trip, we took the top pieces or the top picks for each of these packages, and you can see the percentage of the population that expected to spend $1,500 or more on 4-night stay for each of these groups. So family reunion and the regional wine tour were among the highest percentage of people were in that 1,500 group, or in that 1,500 plus group. And the lowest was the outdoor escapades. So people expected, for the majority of people, it was under 1,500 they would expect to spend on that 4-night trip. And again, to illustrate that, I think the takeaway there is it's, if you're looking at this data, people are not great at estimating a ballpark in one bucket, but are better at estimating what they'll spend in the individual components. So we also asked people if they could build their own perfect package, what would be included? So what type of dining would you do? Where would you stay? What activities? Casual dining was by far the most preferred. And as activities, you can see here the percentage of people that chose each of these different activities. The majority are still looking at outdoor activities. So visiting beach, hiking or walking, having a bonfire, and there is shopping, and going on a tour of a historical site, which again is primarily outdoors. And we're going to talk a little bit about what this means, as the top picks are things that are not easily monetized. So that's my speed through of the data, so that you can have that. Again, we wanted to make sure that was included in the presentation so you can go back and reference it and take a look later. But the important thing is, what do you do with all this? So taking all this together, what can we learn? And some of the insights and lessons that we can take away from this, you're going to probably be familiar with from what we were facing last summer, because again, the sentiment is still similar, and that people are still concerned with health and safety. We're still looking at Atlantic Canadian travel, but there are some new insights that we can offer and that we've learned from this new data set. So the first is the fact that there is the highest opportunity close to home. It's not a bad thing. It's been identified that local travel is going to be sort of the cornerstone of rebuilding the economy locally. Travelers want to stay close to home, but it doesn't mean that, again, they don't want to have leisure experiences. And this is something that we've seen not just in Atlantic Canada, but in other places of the world as well, as staycations being where people are in terms of their level of comfort for the majority of the population. Focusing on leisure experiences that may not require much time on the road. Shorter trips can be built around these experiences, and knowing that you have a local audience is also going to help in terms of what you put together for packages, which I'm going to talk specifically about a little bit later. Digitized experiences are still really important, in line with the concerns around health still being around. Businesses have done a great job over the last 14, 15 months of adjusting and pivoting to all of the lockdowns. And so many have already adopted digitized approaches to things like menus, itineraries, 3D tours. Travelers have become very comfortable with booking things online, and there is an interest in having that digital component. So people are still expecting and appreciative of digitized experiences. And it's not just booking and offering itineraries that that bleeds into this sort of trend, where people are looking online to confirm what the expectations are for their trip. They are looking online to understand how safe and how health protocols are being followed. And there are also opportunities to use digitized experiences to really highlight some of the things that travelers are looking for that may not be directly tied to your offering. So for example, we talked about the really high preference for those natural experiences. So outdoor experiences are still top of the list in terms of what people are looking for. People that are traveling around the Atlantic provinces are looking to experience the natural landscape and beauty. And that's not something that necessarily you can easily connect or again, monetize. But what you can do is highlight those things that surround you as a tourism operator on your site. So if you're operating a restaurant, or if you have an accommodation, go out of your way to make sure that you're highlighting in your social media pages, on your website, photographs and maps of opportunities that have that are close to you, that are trails, beautiful beaches, anything that's nearby that people can experience when they go and visit you and spend time in your business, is something that will attract people. Because again, although you can't necessarily monetize that directly, you can highlight that as a choice to attract people to the area that you're staying in. So that's another way that goes beyond just offering menus and opportunities for booking, to really leverage the higher number of people that are going online to really make decisions. And also thinking about how people's decision-making process has changed when they go online. So people are not just looking for using the online space to make sure that they're going to be traveling to a place that's safe. They have that extra layer of filter around health and safety for COVID. And so, as I said, the things that they're going to be looking for are a little bit different than what they would have been looking for in 2019, and making sure that there's opportunities for being outdoors, for social distancing, that health and safety protocols are being followed. That's all things that can be really easily highlighted online. Friends and family, again, are highly important. So having friends and family to travel with is something that people are really looking forward to this summer, as gathering limits are extended, as people that might have been at high risk are vaccinated now. Getting together with friends and family who are also in Atlantic Canada is something that people are prioritizing. And so as you're marketing out to people and communicating to people, highlighting that opportunity to be with family and friends is something that may be appealing, as the confidence and safety continues to improve and as restrictions continue to loosen. Messaging around these types of reunions can be especially effective. The other thing that you can offer, knowing that people's preference for packages is in having deals, there's opportunity to incentivize inviting friends and family to visit when possible. So if you block a certain number of cottages or rooms, you could get a discount. If you're eating as a group, where we have the opportunity to again increase group sizes, offering discounts or packages that incorporate bringing together people is something that you can also look at. So this is more of a caution than recommendation, but again, taking a look at what we were looking at for prices, you might have been taking the package and looking at where people's mindset were, or where their preferences were, expectations were around cost, and thinking that was low. And one of the reasons I wanted to highlight those that were looking at the 1,500 or more for the 4-night stay is to highlight the fact that opportunities for high-end offerings still exist in the local market. So even though people are more likely to have shorter stays, there's still opportunities for luxury travel experiences. And it's about highlighting the unique experiences in Atlantic Canada and promoting authentic experiences and outstanding natural sites. Again, anything that you can do to provide an experience that's different is something that you can leverage to take advantage of high-end travelers who are still around in the local market. There are people still looking for that experience. We know that outdoor activities are favored. I don't know if anyone has had the chance to be in a group, to sit in a restaurant yet, or to go take part. I know in PEI there was a race that took place that was kind of staggered, but for a lot of people, and myself included, the first time that you're in a group, you get a little bit of a hitch, like, am I supposed to be here? After 15 months of trying very hard to stay away from people, even though vaccination is making it much more safe to be with people and restrictions are being lifted and gathering limits are increasing, people's mindset hasn't quite caught up with the speed at which we're lifting restrictions. And so people are still looking for those experiences that are safe. Their comfort level is increasing, but it's still top of mind. And so really highlighting those outdoor activities and continuing to provide opportunities to be able to dine outdoors, to have experiences outdoors, to gather outdoors, that's something that's going to be really important as we move through the summer and probably until the fall. Again, this goes back to highlighting other opportunities that are around you that are natural experiences is something that you can use to incentivize folks. Investing in consumer confidence is something that continues to be important. So the only thing that I would say is different this year as we move into the summer than last year. Last year, going into the summer, COVID protocols and those communications around health and safety was at the forefront. So that was the first thing that you were communicating to people. As we move out of the pandemic and people are looking forward to putting the pandemic behind us, that information is still extremely important to communicate what your business is doing to provide a safe environment and how they're managing restrictions. Communicating that in a simple and easy to access way is crucial, but it's secondary. And so we want to put that at as a secondary now to the offering that you're providing. So attract folks and communicate about the offering that you have, and then have the COVID information there and available for people. But it's not necessarily the thing that you need to lead with going into the summer. So again, it's very similar in terms of making sure that information is easy to communicate and to understand, which is, I understand, challenging where for the first part of the summer, we've got all 4 provinces moving at sort of different paces and taking different approaches to their reopening. As much as possible, as you're choosing what you're going to do for health and safety, try and go with the lowest common denominator. So instead of trying to communicate 4 different pieces of information to people coming from different provinces, try and go with the lowest common denominator so you can choose one piece of communication around what you're doing with masks, what you're doing with social distancing and cleaning, and so that you can be direct and simple and it's easy for people to digest and understand. And again, in terms of recommendation, it's really important for industry and government to continue to work together. Wherever possible, collectivist messaging has been extremely effective in being able to put people's mind at ease and let people know what restrictions are, and so that people understand what to expect when they're traveling. And making that as easy as possible to understand will increase the number of travelers, increase people's willingness to go out into the world and experience different things, and will certainly help the economy. The other thing, and I think this is my last piece here, is reimagining the travel package. So one piece of information that I think was really helpful in coming out of this piece of research is understanding how travelers that are staycationing and that are local and traveling within the region want to see, if they're interested in travel packages and what they want to see in a travel package. There's definitely interest there, and it's certainly something that would attract folks, but it's different than a travel package that you might see if you were traveling internationally. What people want locally is smaller packages that can be included in an independently planned trip. So building choice and flexibility into packages is also important, and clearly communicating what cost savings are there. So packaging up something like a restaurant experience and maybe one activity would be more beneficial and more attractive to people than offering a full 4-day package with activities built in or a 7-day block where you had meal vouchers at 6 different restaurants and you had your package already kind of planned. People really want flexibility and they want to be able to do piecemeal. And so, but they do like a deal, and they do like things that are packaged together. It might entice people to try out new things that they may not have otherwise gone to try out. And it's certainly something that people are looking for. When I say building choice and flexibility into packages, if you have the opportunity to partner with multiple businesses to be able to say, this is the cost of your package for this activity and a meal at restaurant XYZ. Or if you have 2 different tour options that you can choose from as a part of a package that goes with an accommodation, then that would be more appealing to folks than only having one option as part of your package. So those smaller kind of bite-sized travel packages are what people are looking for as they travel locally. The other thing about packaging that's important as you're communicating those out is to not necessarily have them as a standard thing. People will, just on the urgency principle, eat them up more readily if there is an expiry date on them. So you can think about those mini packages as the same way that you would think about promotions, and offering them with some level of urgency to try and get people to move on them. So having them for a limited time and then changing that up would make people feel like they don't want to miss out. And so you may get more uptake on a small package that's offered for a limited time. So I think some of the key takeaways here, again, as we move into the summer, we're still in a place where flexibility is still important. I think one of the amazing things that's come out of the last year is if anything, there has definitely been resiliency that's built into the tourism industry in dealing with this, and a lot of folks have learned a lot about how they can push their limits and new practices and new things that they brought into their businesses. Unfortunately, we're not quite out of the woods yet, but there's certainly light at the end of the tunnel, and there's definitely new opportunities as we go into the end of the summer and particularly into the fall, and start to be able to welcome folks back from outside of Atlantic Canada. And with that, I would love to hear questions.
Thanks, Leanne. That was really really informative. So just a couple of things before we roll into the questions. A few people had asked about the slide deck. So there was a link to the French and the English in your email reminders, but if not, it'll be on the gmis.ca website as well as this recording. So you can access both of the slide decks in the French and English from the website as well. If you have a question, you can feel free to do a couple of things. You can put it in the chat or the Q&A, or you can hit the raise hand and I can try to figure out technology. Here's a question from Tom. Have you looked at resident sentiment towards non-Atlantic province visitors or communities welcoming of visitors outside of the Atlantic bubble?
So we didn't look at that in this survey, but I know from other research that MQO has done, folks as a rule are not super excited to reopen or to welcome folks from outside of the bubble just yet. Now, the last batch the last bit of information that we gathered around sentiment was still at probably about a 15% vaccination rate, I'd say, in terms of where we were. So I would expect that would change. But again, I think it's important to remember that people's mindsets don't change as quickly as our restrictions are changing. And so I would expect it would probably take until the end of the summer before the majority of the population would be really welcoming and comfortable with people from outside of Atlantic Canada. Right now, it's still, there's still a little bit of negativity around seeing the out of Atlantic Canada license plates and things, although there isn't necessarily the same risk associated as last summer.
What will entice Atlantic Canadians, in particular locals, to book accommodation? From Judy McDonald.
So I would really highlight those messaging that we talked about around pushing reunions. I would utilize packages, short stay packages, wherever you can partner with other businesses and really take advantage of what we know people are looking for, which is outdoor opportunities. So if you're in accommodation, I would really push highlighting the area that you're in and the natural experiences that people can have inside, whether that be biking or hiking trails, opportunities to kayak. If you're in accommodation that happens to be located in a place that has those offerings as a part of your accommodation, certainly push those. But I'd say if you're looking to get people to move from not traveling to traveling, definitely use the urgency principle and push offers that have packages with the messaging around that opportunities for a reunion in a safe space with lots of outdoor activities and in a short time frame. So offering that packages with a limited expiry date. I think those are some things that we can say, at least based on the research, are going to motivate people to move and book nations.
Thanks. Robin Anderson, I see you have your hand raised. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, go ahead. Or maybe not.
Or you can type it into the chat.
Or you can type it in the chat. All right. How do I unmute? You over on the bottom left-hand side, you'll see a little microphone and you can click that. But in the meantime, Charles Costello you mentioned standardizing some rules, protocols in the Atlantic bubble. Will that mean masks and vaccine practices be the same in all 4 provinces? Great question.
So right now, it looks like they are not the same in all 4 provinces. And so I think that is definitely something that will turn some folks away from traveling outside of their province. especially if with restrictions and moving through phases or alert levels very quickly, it can be intimidating for people to feel like they know exactly what to expect from their trip, which we know from other research is very important. People want to know what to expect. And so what I'd recommend there is not necessarily waiting for the provinces to come together and coordinate, but when I talked about the lowest common denominator, finding out which of the provinces is sort of at the most cautious phase, communicating that as your business standard so that you make sure that you meet all of the other provinces. So don't try and communicate to potential travelers what all 4 provinces are. You make the decision as an operator what you are going to do, and communicate that to your prospective travelers, because we know people, the vast majority of the population, 85%, are still very concerned about COVID. So no one is going to fault you for being, the majority of the population is not going to fault you for being overcautious. If anything, that's still what they're looking for. Because as I've said, again, people aren't moving, their comfort level is not matching our release of restrictions. So pick a very simple messaging that you can communicate to people regardless of what province they're coming with, and try and make it consistent for yourself.
Awesome. Robin, if you want to ask your question, you can go ahead. You can unmute yourself now.
There, I found it. Hi, thank you. So we're here from Sherbrooke Village. So we're a large historic site. So it was really nice to see that we're top 5 of places that people might want to venture out to. I'm just wondering if marketing that we are now offering free admission this summer would be helpful to our partners who obviously cost money. So i.e. the hotels or anybody local in the area who maybe are doing other experiences that are costly. Would it be beneficial for us to package and partner with them so that the consumer feels like they're getting a deal with this free thing that's kind of in next door?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to communicate with highlighting trails and beaches that are local, that are close by. We know one of the highlights in terms of what's appealing to folks for packages is also knowing what's open and what's available. And part of that is understanding, if I'm going to take a 4-day trip to another part of the province, is there enough for me to do in that 4 days? And people are not necessarily, folks that are looking at local travel, even though they're familiar with the area, don't necessarily have top of mind what the tourist attractions are. And so they may, for lack of a better word, stereotype a particular area and not think there's many things to do. So packaging up things, even if they're not part of a package that costs, but being able to offer people an itinerary or options for things that they can do, I think is incredibly valuable and would be incredibly enticing, because it makes it very easy for people to say, okay, there's a number of outdoor activities that I can do if I head in this area that are going to be safe for me and my family. And so I think there's incredible value in packaging up local museums, especially if they're free, and including them as part of the package.
And then just a follow-up to that question, I feel like I'm on with Dr. Strang. My follow-up question is, what was it? Sorry. So if they're coming to our establishment for free, is there an opportunity that they're probably going to spend more at, say, our gift shop or our restaurant?
I don't have any I don't like to make assumptions on things. I don't have any data that would necessarily lead to that. It would stand to reason potentially, but I do know, I can speak to some things that we've looked into around incentive traveling, like for example, traveling to a particular location and getting a discount. We know that hasn't really enticed people that weren't intending to travel, and it doesn't mean necessarily that they're going to spend more. Would they have more disposable income to spend? Sure. But I don't have any hard facts that would necessarily ensure that. One thing that I would say I would encourage to do, however, is to, if there are any opportunities for you to create experiences, even though the general admission is free, but to create special experiences that people could pay for, people would be more likely to grab those special experiences, I believe, than necessarily just opting to pay at a more at a restaurant or gift shop, where that, again, it's that sense of not missing out on something.
Super. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's better to give them an.
Excellent. Brian, you have your hand raised if you want to unmute yourself. Brian Rose.
Hey, Jonathan, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm from Fortune at the border with St. Pierre and Miquelon, and I'm just wondering if Leanne, you did any research that will gauge the sentiment of people with respect to St. Pierre-Miquelon joining the Atlantic bubble, and how that may affect travel patterns if the border to St. Pierre-Miquelon, France was open for Atlantic Canadians?
We haven't done anything specifically on that. Oh, that's really interesting. I know I would say that would be a little bit different than what we've seen around the Quebec-New Brunswick border. And I think there would probably be more, just again, based on other work that we've done, there would probably be less objection to that, given there's an island there, as opposed to that direct tie to the rest of Canada. But I don't have any specific answers for you on that one. I would say it's very likely there'd be less objection in that case.
Yeah, it's been challenging. Kind of feel like anytime we see these type of presentations or research done, it's never, St. Pierre's never included, and it's a bit is a bit I don't know what word to use, but off-putting, I guess, really, because they are such a unique and destination, you know, in our not only in our province but in our region, like our Atlantic region, you know. So, all right, I just want.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to wrap them in. It's such low risk that I would say I can't imagine what the argument would be against.
Yeah, well, actually, France sent them vaccinations a few months back, so they got like 75% of their total population fully vaccinated at this point.
Yeah, so we do know from this research that if that's the case, there is a good portion of people that have already communicated that they would be comfortable traveling to a place where that's the vaccination rate. So again, I would say like it's definitely a place that people will consider and will be comfortable considering traveling. So wrapping them into the bubble would be a great idea, and I think there's certainly a lot of opportunity for movement there. But I don't know if that's when that would be opened up. I expect it right now. You'd be looking at July.
For St. Pierre?
Yeah.
Oh no, it's not even. There's been no dates whatsoever set. Okay. In fact, we're advocating trying to get that open, like you said, because it's sort of a unique opportunity to. I'm air quoting here, like travel internationally, but still stay at home. You know, so.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great message to appeal to people who are dying to get back out there.
Yeah, for sure. All right, thank you.
Okay, I'll come back to some of the people who have their hands raised because there's a bunch of questions in a variety of different locations. So we'll try to work our way through these. So this is from Canty. It's, what is the sentiment of independent hotel owners versus branded hotels? And what would be a great strategy for us as independents?
I think independents pushing the fact that if you have more control over your health and safety, that's certainly something to go. The other thing that we didn't talk about that, again, we know from other research is supporting local and sustainability are another two big trends that people are grasping onto. It's not, we're not talking the sweeping portion of the population, like the 85% that are looking at concerns around health and safety for COVID, but there is a good portion of the population that are coming out of the pandemic with a heightened appreciation and that are actively looking for support for local tourism operators and for sustainability. So as an independent operator, I mean, pushing sustainability anywhere that you can and highlighting the support for local would certainly be two aspects that you could roll with in terms of separating you from chain hotels.
Great. This is probably a hard one to answer because I think it'll from higher sources than what we're able to talk about here today. But will people be required to show proof of vaccination when booking or at the door? Not sure if that was already answered.
That's certainly not a mandate that I've heard of. So I think that there's provincially a couple of whereas I know PEI is looking for proof of vaccination to enter the province, but in terms of having to do that as an operator, I wouldn't imagine that would be something that you would need to do at the operator level. But again, that's not something that I've heard anything on. It's not something that we researched either in terms of support. Although I will say We did some work on how people felt about the need for things like passports before it was suggested that you might need proof of vaccination to come in. So that was in March, I believe. And there was a very high level of support in Atlantic Canada for passports. So since we're looking at a local regional market, should you choose to do that, if you wanted to incorporate that, I believe it was in the high 70% that said that they would be supportive of actually providing proof of vaccination. Now, if you don't have to do it, I probably wouldn't, because there is a small portion of the population that you're going to irritate quite heavily by asking that. But hopefully that's some information for you.
Excellent, thanks. Let's see here from David. With respect to the family reunion theme, is there an opportunity here for highlighting genealogical connections for visitors? On that note, Brian, you're my wife. I love this. Even online, we can always, as Canadians, know somebody, right?
You miss the opportunity to connect with people and network a bit when you're waiting for these things in person. But I love that. Yeah, I absolutely think that's great. Again, we know that it is something that people are looking for a little more than normal, is that multi-generational connection. So it's certainly something that couldn't hurt to highlight, where people are in that mindset, and people have gotten a little sentimental about that after not being able to see their loved ones over the last 14, 15 months. So yeah, I definitely think it's an opportunity.
Awesome. And Brian, I'm sure you know this already, but Krista had posted a link through to what the province had done about resident sentiment towards welcoming St. Pierre residents. But anyways, it's there in the chat. Michaela, you have your hand raised. Do you have a question that you'd like to ask, Michaela?
Oh, you talking to me? No, I must have hit the button by mistake. I'm sorry.
No worries. One of the things that Leanne and I were talking before we started on, and she highlighted about the communication side of things, and we were just laughing amongst ourselves, you know, and we're two people that are plugged into this stuff daily. And it was just funny how confused even I was about where I could go or where I couldn't go. And I think that's part of the issue that you need to be thinking about as a business. So you've got 4 different provincial departments generally releasing information around the same time each day. Sometimes, you know, it applies to 2 provinces. Sometimes it only applies to 1 province. And it is quite confusing. And we were just laughing. It's, you know, we've been locked up here for 15 months. And one of the things that I've seen and heard as well is that make it as easy as possible for me as a consumer to travel. And sometimes it might mean you as an operator providing some of that information for me versus having to dive into different sites and things, because there's lots of unknowns right now around that. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Leanne, if you wanted to comment.
I absolutely agree. That's exactly what I was trying to communicate with the lowest common denominator statement. It's very confusing right now. There's going to be a lot of changes as we go through the summer, trying to decipher it on, it's a lot more work, but trying to decipher it on your own and presenting it to travelers in the easiest possible way. I used the example when Jonathan and I were talking earlier about Jamaica, and even earlier in the pandemic, one thing that they did is the approach they took was to try and alleviate people's fears. And so it didn't matter what country you're coming from and what the isolation rules were. If there's a risk that you're not going to be able to go back into your country because you test positive for COVID, your stay is automatically extended where you're staying in Jamaica for 2 additional weeks. If you get sick while you're in Jamaica, they arrange to medevac you back to your country. They had offered, again, things like free cancellations. They set aside a portion of the country which they called the tourism corridor, where everything was coordinated and people were tested regularly who were operating there. So you could be very safe that anywhere you travel in this whole area, that staff were going to be vaccinated, which is something we didn't talk about, but something else that as an accommodation or someone providing, you might consider communicating for safety. So all of those things, that the takeaway from that, from the success in that Jamaica had, is to try and alleviate people's fears and communicate very simply. It's just easy. And that's what they were saying. It's like, it's super easy to come here because no matter what possible negative outcome might happen, we've got you covered. And so for Atlantic Canada, I think that means just making it very, very simple for people to travel to you. And that means trying to decipher the current restrictions on behalf of people, and to be able to post those in a place that's easy for people to find. Not front and center, because again, I think that leading into the summer, that information needs to be available for people, but not the number one message that you're setting out in the world.
Awesome, thanks. Look, we even got somebody trying to recruit a consultant on here at the bottom. Look. So this was awesome information. I think that there's lots of really good pieces that we can take here that are tangible things that we can look at within our operations and our destinations over the short term and the near term as well. I will have all of this information, the recording and the links to both of the slide decks in French and English on the gmis.ca site sometime later today or early tomorrow. So if you want to access that or push it to other individuals who may not have been able to attend today, that information will be there. But I really want to thank you, Leanne. As always, great information, very well presented. And I love the way that you've taken that data and you've given it to us in a way we can understand and how to use it. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.